Okay, so I had a question about number 9 on the homework, and what I did is I wrote it all out so I could just kind of talk through it, and that way you don't have to sit there and wait for me to write it all out. So this is the one where they are testing a new reading method with a traditional reading method, and we need to decide, do these results suggest that the new activities are better? Test an appropriate hypotheses and state your conclusion. You do not have to worry about Tukey's test. That's not something that we need to know. So I started off with my null hypotheses, and notice that I use mu, not p, so make sure on all your work you're using mu because we're talking about means. And I didn't call it mu1 and mu2, I called it mu in for the new method and mu c for the control group because that's what they referred to it here. So then my null hypothesis is to say there is no difference in the mean reading scores in the two groups, and my alternative, mu sub n is greater than mu sub c. The mean reading score for the new method is higher. Then I need to check my conditions. So first of all, the students were randomly assigned. Please do not say random check mark. Look up at the problem, it says she randomly assigned, so state the students were randomly assigned to a method. The second one, since they were random, the two groups should be independent. It is, if you have two groups, you absolutely have to state that the two groups are independent, because if they're not, the procedure doesn't work. The third thing is the 10% rule, and 40, which is the total of the two groups, is less than 10% of all third grade students. And it might not be all third grade students of that teacher that year, but if you consider all of her past students, all of her students she's had, it's less than 10% of those. And then you make a comment about the stem plots. Now here, the stem plots are provided, so I just had to say the stem plots look approximately normal. Had the stem plots not been provided, then you must provide them, or a histogram or something. You cannot just refer to the graph if there is no graph. So make sure that you are doing that. Once the conditions have been met, you name your test. Oh, look what I forgot here. Let's fix this. The two sample t-tests for the difference of the means. That would be important. So that's the test. It's a long name. We've got a lot of different tests now. So you need to make sure that you don't just call it a t-test, because we have other t-tests. It's a two sample t-test for the difference of the means. So make sure you're specific. What I showed you next, I entered all my data. Now when you enter this data, remember on a stem plot, this is the 2 and this is 24, 33. The stem is the tens place, and then the digits over here are the ones place. So 33, 43, 43. So I went through and I typed in all of the values in L1 and then all of the other scores in L2. So like this one reads 10, 17, 20, 26. So when you read that, so I put them all in L1 and L2. Then when I set up my two sample t-test, instead of stats, I chose data because I actually had the data, L1 and L2. The frequency lists are just 1, and that's the default. I wanted a right-tailed test because I wanted to know if it was greater than the control group. Always choose no for pooled. And then when you calculate, you get this information. What you need to write down from that, these three things right here are extremely important. Your test statistic, which is 2.207. And why did I write 2.21? I don't even know where that came. Oh, duh. All right, and that was on videotape, so now y'all heard me say that. Where did that come from? Okay, and then we have 37 degrees of freedom. Now you can list that separately, df equals 37, or you could do like I did here with t with a subscript of 37. If you did this on, if you just did this by hand and use, then you could always use like the degrees of freedom, the lesser of the two, so it would be 17 degrees of freedom. But if you use your calculator, write down what your calculator gives you for degrees of freedom. My p-value is 0.0168. So I write down that information because that's important, and then I'm ready to make my conclusion. So I started off, I decided to do the definition of a p-value, which is this part. This part right here is the definition of a p-value. I probably could have got away without putting that here. If there is no difference between the means of the reading scores, so that's saying if the null hypothesis is true, if there is no difference between the means of the reading scores, then the probability of getting results as extreme or more than ours is 0.0168. Oh, wait, I missed something. With that low p-value, we have evidence to suggest that the mean reading score with the new method is higher than the mean score of the traditional method. Now, writing that in with that low, that is like, that's a deal breaker. I mean, that would lose a point. I would lose a point on the rubric for not doing that. You have to link your decision to the fact that you have a low p-value. By the way, for the AP exam, the inference for means, this, what we're doing right now and what is in chapter 25 is included in the possible questions that they could ask on the AP exam. So, so this is something that we need to know, but you don't have to know how to calculate stuff by hand with all the formulas. You're allowed to use the calculator to do this, but you have to make sure that you are writing down the important information, and it's all about the communication. It's all about having these words, naming the test. I mean, don't lose a point because you forgot to name the test. Don't lose a point because you forgot to say, that's a low p-value. Make sure that you include all those details. So hopefully this gives you an idea, another opportunity to see an example of really what you need to include. There's only 2 free response questions on the exam this year. And I can't guarantee, but I think one of them is going to be inference. I really do. It could be proportions, could be means, but I do think they will have an inference question because it's just too important of a concept not to have on there. So I think there will be something. And these are the details you need to have. So hopefully that helps.